Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to not Gwen's Bookish Ramblings because, hey, it's another anniversary. And like 2 days ago, I suddenly realized that it was time for another anniversary and realized that I hadn't actually thought in advance of what I was going to do for my anniversary special. And, since I do not have copious fans who will, bring things up and make suggestions or demands or whatever, for the record, no, I wouldn't fold to demands anyways, because once you start folding to demands, that's when people start asking you to do things like read Twilight, and no. So, it's time for another anniversary, and I panicked, and I thought, I'm going to talk about what? And so what I came down on, after much internal agonizing, was I'm going to talk about the concept of the video game adaptation of books. So the interesting thing about video game adaptations, indeed video games in terms of plot, is that films and books, works of film, whether television or, proper in theater movies, either way, is that they're both storytelling mediums. A play is a storytelling medium where you have a beginning, a middle, and an end, or at least you do, as long as you're not trying to do, weird extratemporal conceptual things where nobody can tell where and when you are in time. But the point is to tell a story, to stand in front of the audience and go, here's my story, once upon a time, a thing happened. And video games are not actually well designed for that. Video games can tell a story. And video games do, they have the ability to tell a story, but they're not designed for it. They're designed for interaction. And in a very pointed comment, someone once asked me, how is that, in fact, any different from Super Mario Brothers? Because if you think about it, yes, Super Mario is going to rescue the princess, but it's an incredibly basic story. It is get from point A to point B, and at the end you will reach your goal of rescuing the princess, assuming she's not in another castle. And there isn't a lot of story to be told by, and then he jumped, and then he hit some bricks overhead, and then he jumped on a turtle thing. Do I know what any of the things are called in Super Mario? No, I don't, because I am not, in fact, the world's greatest Super Mario devotee. You've pretty much got me stumped after Goombas. So, the thing is that you can tell a story in a video game by having cutscenes, by having somebody appear and, give you some narration. You can tell a story by having somebody do a voiceover, as in this particularly ridiculous example, which is actually Great Gatsby, the hidden object game. And the thing about this is, it's a hidden object game with a much expurgated version of Great Gatsby grafted on top of it. Now, a hidden object game is, those placemat things that you had, and, the placemats that they gave you when you were a kid, where you had the picture in it and you were supposed to find all of the objects in the picture, and it would say, find the basketball and the rabbit and whatever. Well, that's the object in this game, is you're supposed to find the wooden wheel and the pumpkin and a bow and a camera and so on and so forth. And the thing is, you can graft Great Gatsby on top of it by saying, we are looking for a bear and a dry branch at Tom and Daisy Buchanan's house. But that's not telling a story, that's just clicking random objects while the story is sort of playing in the background, while the story is playing in between clicking things. In an effort to make things a little more interactive, At the start of the game, you have a sort of a scrolling scene where you're supposed to find all of the clocks that appear in the scrolling scene. As you can see here up in the top left corner, there is a mouse cursor and a clock. And if you click on the clock, then you get more points and stuff. So, you know, and hidden object games, I enjoy them, but this doesn't tell a story. The hidden object nature of things doesn't, in fact, connect to the actual telling of the story. And that is one of the great difficulties of video games as a storytelling medium, is that the gameplay itself is often... It is often very difficult to tell a story through gameplay. You know, like, there are some games, as games have evolved, that can in their way tell a story through gameplay. But at the same time, depending on how linear the game is, as they say, you can almost feel like that storytelling in the gameplay isn't so much gameplay as just something talking at you. A linear video game is one where you start at point A and you have to follow a particular path to get to the end of the game to win it, which is fine, but very often that can mean that whatever choices that you make in the game in terms of the dialogue choices that you make in talking to particular characters and so on and so forth don't actually mean anything, don't actually add up to anything, don't cause a different outcome. And so telling a story through a video game by having interactions with other people is problematic also because you have to make the talking to other people to somehow tell the story. And so you might be able to pull that off in some cases if you were to do, say, a Sherlock Holmes mystery and have to talk to people as Sherlock and do puzzling things to put together clues in a Sherlockian way. You might be able to make a game out of that where the story itself is told through the gameplay. But you can't tell the story of Great Gatsby through the gameplay because these are just preset conversations that have to happen the way they do, or else you're not telling the story of Great Gatsby. It's somewhat different, of course, if you go into Sierra Entertainment's The Hobbit, which apparently dates from something like 2001. I stole this and the next image off of ClementJ64's YouTube channel because he has a playthrough of this game. And yeah, I'm one of those people who watches Let's Plays. What of it? So the thing about The Hobbit, of course, is that it's an action-adventure-y story, and it's a relatively short one, and it's in another world, so you get to have lots of wandering around, you get to run into exciting creatures, and you're exploring Middle-earth, and so on and so forth. So there is some scope there, in terms of The Hobbit, or in terms of any other adventure-type story, like The Lord of the Rings, that there is some scope there to say, well, and then the next thing they did was they fought a bunch of orcs, so we don't have to tell the story of fighting orcs, you can experience the fighting of orcs in the video game. Well, that's great. Except, here's a problem. Bilbo Baggins, and I grant The Hobbit is not a book that I have actually read because I have a thing that is entirely personal and has absolutely nothing to do with any social, political, or gender issues that might be related to the book. It is entirely idiosyncratic. And you probably don't want to know, actually. But the point is that I don't recall Bilbo Baggins as being the kind of character who will take on 83 goblins one after another, or single-handedly fight a whole bunch of spiders, ginormous 83 times his own size spiders, single-handed, while the dwarves run away and hide, because dwarves are apparently useless as warriors or help or anything. So, this game is basically mostly Bilbo Baggins running around stabbing stuff with his sword, And the problem with that, of course, is that when you talk about this, a lot of The Hobbit is talky stuff, is stuff like playing the ancient game of riddles with, what's his noodle? The creepy guy. I don't remember his name. It'll come back to me after I'm finished recording this, and I'm not going back to it, so, you can yell at me in the comments if you feel like it. Anyways, the point is, though, that in this particular thing, you can't play a game of riddles. How would you play a game of riddles in a video game? You can't compose riddles. You're not, like, picking riddles yourself. You could, I suppose, set it up to have answers for riddles, but, I mean, you can't make, riddles are a highly problematic thing, and the whole issue is the back and forth between Gollum and Bilbo about these riddles. And instead what this does is it just gives you this still and says they agreed to play the ancient game of riddles, and then it goes to an animated cutscene where Bilbo gives his incredibly cheap, and will always be cheap, because seriously, that was cheap, "What's in my pocket?" And then it cut back to more of this. And so much of this game is just, either animated cutscenes or stills like this in order to tell the story. The story may be there for the most part in whatever ways, but it's not being told in the gameplay. It's being told in this other stuff that's just kind of there. And the gameplay is all Bilbo Baggins running around whacking stuff. And again, nothing wrong per se at having a hobbit, desperately killing wargs and so on, but again, Bilbo's strengths in the book are less his swordplay. And so you're losing whole aspects of what make that book what it is when you're not having the actual conversations with Elrond, when you're not having the actual conversations with Gollum, when you're not having the actual discussions with anybody, you're just having these shorthanded cutscenes. And so book adaptations into video games are problematic, but here's the thing that gives so much possibility for a video game adaptation of a book, and that's that because of the nature of a video game, you can stop it somewhere. You can say, we're stopping this and we're going to come back later. Which is less a thing you can do with a movie. I mean, sure, yeah, you can stop your DVD and you can pick it up later, but the whole point is that you can have all the parts of the book in the video game if only you can figure out how to tell those stories. You can explore, and it's one of the most interesting things about video games is the exploratory capability, is the ability to say, we're going to open up the whole of the world of Lord of the Rings and allow you to travel everywhere and see all the things and meet all the people and do all the stuff. And so there's scope there for exploration of a world. There's scope there for something, but the difficulty is the translation of a fundamentally and essentially and only storytelling medium into something that is basically saying to the gamer, to the game player, you're supposed to go and in a way you're making your own story, because this is about how well you play the game. This is about the dialogue choices that you make. This is about the places you choose to go. This is about your efforts to cause the game to glitch out and fall through the floor because some people find that a good time. And so the question really becomes, how do you balance that? Because as of the present, these things, it still hasn't been reached yet, that point where the gameplay and the storytelling actually function hand in hand rather than alternating. And that's all I have to say, so I'll see you all next week.